Hi, everybody. أهلا وسهلا بالجميع. I'm Lara. Welcome to Psychic Militancy. I have one of your faves and one of my faves, Jay, back on with us. So before I get started, you know the drill. Please subscribe to both of our channels, Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. I would be very surprised if anyone here is not subscribed to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, but just in case you're not, make sure you subscribe, become a Patreon. Also for the Imperial 80s, that is a whole separate thing. So make sure that you sign up for that. I have so much to catch up on, Jay, of your shows, but this morning you had an amazing live stream about the border atrocities in Spain and Morocco. So I want to go back and do that. So folks, make sure if you didn't check that out this morning, make sure you check that out. Subscribe to our channel here. Send to a comrade, like, comment, do all the fucking shit. All right, now that's out of the way. Welcome, my friend. I'm so glad to see you. I've missed you. And I was thinking, you know, there's so much shit that happened. Like, it feels like a year has gone by. For those who don't know, I was back home in Lebanon, which we can get into what that felt like to be home. But it felt like an entire year had passed. My electronics weren't with me for a period of time. I won't get into all the reasons why, but for that reason also, I don't feel like I was really in the know about what was happening, apart from the fact that empire moves at such a fucking rate currently now in its crisis too. So I feel like there's so much going on. So I was like, who better than to speak with about this than Jay? And update, give us the rundown. What the fuck happened while I was gone? How have you been? And then he and I always have something to talk about. So I'm not concerned about us getting into the details. How are you? How's it going?
I'm good, and it is great to be with you again. The last time that I saw you was, in Philly when you came as a part of your little like mini East Coast tour. Actually,
Red
no, that's not
Emma's.
true.
Yeah.
That's right. I saw you in Red Emma's a couple days later than that. So, yeah, in Baltimore was the last time I saw you, but I did see you in Philly as well. So it's good to see. It's been a while since we've done a stream together or episode
Yeah.
together. So that's good. Yeah, I mean, I have actually been also by my standards taking it relatively easy this summer, which means that we only did 10 episodes in July, which was I think the least we had done in I don't even know, maybe 2 years. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on, so we can delve into many things. Although there is a kind of feeling I have right now, which is just sort of like that because the United States is losing the war, the imperialist illegal war of aggression against Iran, that a lot of things are kind of in this holding pattern, it feels like in some sense, right? Where Venezuela is under this, they've had their resources seized and their sovereignty is certainly highly, highly compromised at this point. Cuba, I think, is something that we will touch upon. I'm gonna have Alex on Thursday to do something for what would be Fidel Castro's 100th birthday. But there was a big Cuba report, which some people have speculated was written by Claude or some AI. It's hard to say that for me with any certainty, because if you've read government reports, that that they're all written like that, and so like
true.
it's difficult to know.
Maybe they've had secret AI before it became like, could be that, but that's literally how ridiculous they are. You're right.
It could be.
You and I have
mean,
talked about that.
yeah, I remember Dylan Rodriguez talking about like the counterinsurgency field manual and how it kind of, I don't remember if he used the term AI, but I feel like he did. But and again, folks, so-called AI, language learning models or whatever they are, they're not. I understand that it's not a sentient robot that is writing these things.
Wait, have
But
people like pushed up against you or something
no, it's, I
about
mean,
that?
sometimes people will say, we'll put AI in quotes. And like, we've had a good number of conversations with Dwayne Monroe over the last few years, and
Yeah.
he's really helped to clarify for people, because that term itself, right, is a form of propaganda. It's a marketing term, right?
Yeah.
A
Yep.
term to convince people. And even all of the stories that you get about, like, you know, AI broke into some other database and, held people for ransom, like whatever, the stuff that people, it's like, this is all, you guys have watched The Terminator too many times. You're trying to promote your products that everybody fucking hates, by the way. Everybody hates
Yes.
the shit. I mean,
Yep.
one of the most exciting developments in the United States, of which there are not very often very many exciting developments, but is the widespread hatred that people have of data centers, which I didn't
Yep.
expect would kind of catch on as quickly as it has. And you watch even like the mainstream, corporate media reports about this stuff, and they really are concerned and don't know quite how to report on it, right? Because it's like they have their little way of like, oh, well, people are concerned about this, and like, they can't be like just totally, they have to at least nod to these concerns, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and like, the reality is that you just have this big convergence of forces around, oh, you want to build what in our area, and how much water is it going to use, and
Right.
how much electricity is going to use, and how much pollution is it going to cause, and what's it do to the grid, and why do I need this? And then the end product that people have is just this slop, it
Yep.
just making everybody dumber. And so yeah, I mean, other than Iranian Lego videos, there's not much that you can point to that, and whether or not those are caused are generated by AI is a subject of debate. But anyway, I don't. Yeah, it's good to be with you.
There's a same here, and this is why, because we got so much to cover. But I hadn't thought about this before, but what you were just saying about how everybody fucking hates them, and I agree. I have the same sort of sense of things, but it's good for us to remember that when people are saying stuff like that, like a convergence of things, how much water is it going to use, the pollution, space, resources, that those are all signs of the successes of multiple movements over the course of decades that are now sort of coming together and cohering and coming to fruition. But those movements, we were told, were failures fundamentally. And just like we're seeing with Iran, people's position and people, connecting the dots with Zionism, with Iran, empire, anti capitalist shit, everything coming together has been because actually the movements have not been failures, right? It's because there has been a political project of the left, and I'm saying that broadly, that has been about also disseminating particular discourses, which I'm not saying those have not been co opted and taken and sort of rewired and all of that, but to have that be the talking point against AI more or data centers more broadly, I think says something, and we have to look at that. Like this discourse doesn't come out of nowhere, you know? And I think we're doing ourselves actually a disservice when we're just like giving it all away. It's like, no, there's been a consolidation of a lot of these things so that people can now in this moment be like, that's fucked up. And here are the reasons why, which feels different than like other moments in time, at least for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, and I think, some of the things we could think about there are different phases of the environmental movement,
Yeah.
right? But also, like, I was thinking about fights against prisons and jails
Yeah.
in many ways too, because that was often, you know, it was a fight against like uses of money, resources,
Mm-hmm.
land, and then the labor question too, which I do think is particularly important with Because one of the ways that prisons were sold, right, was like, oh, well, it bring jobs to your community that
Right.
doesn't have many jobs. And of course, many people come from not in the community, and also the jobs are fucking horrible.
Yeah.
Who wants to work in a prison? All of those things. But then the labor thing with AI, I think, is an important component of it too, because people really do. And in some ways, it's interesting because you could look at how there's been this sci-fi, fascination or interest with AI for a very long time, but sci-fi authors also from way back understood it as competition, right? And understood it, like, it often got posed like we did Terminator recently, which is why this is on my mind.
Yes.
But like, it was actually like a all-out war where the machines were willing to go back in time to kill the mother of the baby who would lead the revolution against right? And so I also say that to say that it's interesting in that respect, because there's been a way in which there's been a very prominent, like, capitalist promoted discourse around AI that
Yeah.
has also been afraid of it for a very long time. So when it
Yes.
arises and people say, this is here, it's ready to make your life great, it's all good.
Right.
There's also an inborn but not very, not very analytical, not very, not Marxists, right? Not looking to kind of understand it from a political, economic, and like what can it do and what can it do, and who's going to benefit from this
Right.
arrangement and that stuff. But nonetheless, there's like this low level, just like, uh-oh, the fucking machines are here and we need to
Yeah.
start fighting them now, because
Yes.
otherwise they're
There's
going to
only
come
one
for
way
us.
this goes. Exactly. Yeah, totally. There's always that's the fantasy that's involved with it. But also there's this something really that matches this idea of like these discourses converging because our movements have been successful in disseminating discourse, but were sold the story that they were failures. The same thing, I think, to your point about capitalist sort of plunder in AI and a marketing scheme, it also functions on this inevitability narrative, because that's what I hear. Like, this is just inevitable. You might as well give up to it now. You're defeated already. AI is here to stay. All your world's going to be captured by these. I mean, it's an interesting confessional because it's all about like being captured by these billionaires. It's not just by the robots, right? Because like that's the shit that's more scary to me. It's these fuckers that, 5 or 6 people in the world who come together in these meetings and decide about this shit. And they really are like that. I mean, like, I don't know about you, but I did not know we would be living in the world where like trilateral like, what the fuck, man? Like, all this shit was conspiracy theories. And here you motherfuckers are just outright saying we are 6 people completely meeting together, deciding on this. But like that feels like the fear, and maybe it's displaced into, oh, it's robots, where it's just like the robots you're actually talking about, like this is where sci-fi comes in, are actually the overlords of the world. And those overlords are capitalist fucking, monsters who own everything and don't give a fuck about you and would see you die and your existence cease, which is, I think it was Peter Thiel who said that, like, right? Where he was like, oh, I don't give a fuck. Maybe people will die. Maybe the whole, human
Yeah, he
race
has
will
like
be.
this transhumanist like kind of perspective that human beings will
Yeah,
somehow like merge with technology and like seeks to
right.
be really human beings. It's
Yes. Meanwhile, he's injecting himself with every fucking thing to become like immortal. This is the thing with these
yeah.
guys. I'm just
Well,
like,
and
you are.
his literal thing is to talk about the Antichrist too, which I'm always like, bro, like, have you
Calm
looked
down.
in the mirror? You are if anyone is the Antichrist, it is you. Like,
And we all know it. We all know it. Like, you're the one pretending you don't, disavowing this shit, and like everybody else knows it. But all this to say is that there's something really important about folks being like, this shit scare. Like, there's something about this moment that makes it a little different. I mean, I was people were talking about this in Lebanon. I'm always fascinated by the portability of these discourses from the shout out to Renee, who's in the chat, saying that you're taking words right out of her head about him being the Antichrist. But I'm always fascinated by how these things, is like this portability of discourses that may or may not have any, bearing on that part of the world. Obviously, AI and overlords and billionaire class does, because this is precisely what we're seeing play out in terms of Gaza and drone warfare and what they're vying for when they talk about normalization. What are they actually vying for? What are they vying for in terms of taking up land and land accumulation and all these sorts of things? Data centers under the water, Greece. I know you want to talk about Greek shit, but like Greece being a central piece of this, and Cyprus. And so I know that's the piece, but like I'm always fascinated by the portability. And like folks are everyday folks and like cab drivers, which is my favorite thing, right? Is like a cab driver talking about AI and what does that mean in the context. I find it funny in the context of Lebanon because it still has the worst fucking Wi-Fi in the world, which is a conversation Sina and I were having. Like it's so overpriced. Let alone, by the way, electricity is non-existent. So I was talking to my folks and they were saying usually in the summer that changes, and especially in Beirut that changes. But now there's like 2 hours of electricity a day to people. And that usually comes at like 4 a.m., between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. And there are people who have generators and stuff, but that's what people are relying on. So I'm just always you're here talking about AI and this like tech, I don't know, hellscape that you're talking about. And then there's like the everydayness of like zero technology. But that shows you that this is ripe for the taking, which gives me a whole different viewpoint about what is happening and why people are vying in the way that they are in unspoken ways for Lebanon, particularly. Why the empire? Like when we ask these questions, like why is it this country has a particular valence in the empire's arsenal? Land is definitely a part of that, but that sort of shit, I was like, oh, okay, there's a larger thing that's happening here. And I think for us to track it is, again, it's not just us being involved in like conspiratorial shit. It's to be like, these are the things that this overlord class actually is very invested in. And there are all these ways in which these different spaces and regional actual land is being used to plan in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're onto something, which is, I mean, we've talked about a couple of different elements of this, but I think that it's very difficult to exist in this world and to experience it and look outside and not understand like a great deal of the things that are wrong with it.
Yeah.
And to not understand that those things largely come from a very specific and small group of people.
Yes.
And I think that's a product of a lot of things. I think it has been very much accelerated by the genocide. And I imagine in a place like Lebanon, with the proximity and the constant kind of bombardment and things like that people are under, and the way that the Lebanese state also has like capitulated to so much of this, that I mean, it probably can be easy sometimes to displace certain things on different rungs of the ladder, right? But I don't know. I mean, it's definitely quite apparent, I think, to people like what a lot of the problems of the world are, I guess is what I'm saying, and who are the real causes of those problems. And I think that my hope is that some of the classic discourses that have been used for centuries, really, but definitely for decades, around trying to displace things on immigrants or migrants or stuff like that, that this also loses weight in this moment too, when people can
Yeah.
see so clearly like what is being done to force people to have to like find other places to exist in the
Yeah.
world and so on. And I don't know. I mean, there is. I think there's reason to be hopeful or to be optimistic, at least about the level of awareness of certain stuff. But there's also on the flip side of this, and like this is what the conversation that Sina and I have been debating a little bit in a chat, and we did it a little bit in our episode, right? Is like the so talking about the imperial decline,
Yeah.
which is very real and we can see it, and the inability to just impose what it wants in the world is declining. It doesn't mean that it can't cause extreme violence, which we see. Doesn't mean that it can't, in certain instances, like compel what it wants out of different, places and states and things like this. But their projection of power, I think, globally is less, and
Yeah.
obviously, like the quality of life that people have experienced within the imperial core and all of that, like people are, realize that these things are on the decline. Um, but I do. One of the things that Cena posed was like that Hollywood has also, you know, like that it's also in severe decline, is basically like total collapse to some degree at this point. And this is a really interesting thing. It's a provocation I've been sitting with a lot. I do think you can see a real decline if you look at like, things like box office sales and ticket
Mm.
sales and stuff like that. Although this year, which I know we will talk about, the Odyssey, which I didn't force you to go watch. You watched it on your own,
No,
so you have to.
we did. Yeah.
um, but
Yeah, I do blame
but
watching that episode, which I was
oh,
watching
okay.
live
So it
on
is
a
it is still
plane.
my fault. Okay,
Yes,
yeah,
it's of course, everything mainstream is gonna be like, I'm like, I gotta go. I was watching you live on a plane and being like, okay, I gotta watch this fucking movie.
right on. So we'll get into that in a bit. But like this year's an outlier in that
Yeah,
out of the last, like, since 20 since COVID came in, right? There's been a lot of concern of like theaters are going to go away,
yeah,
Hollywood's collapsing, this whole model doesn't work anymore. We haven't figured out how to make enough money from streaming and stuff like that. And so like this, they can't make big movies, like all this kind of stuff. And obviously this year has shown that um there is there is an ability for at least some exceptions to what I think is a
mhm,
general trend. But the thing is also, especially with stuff when we get into this conversation around like AI and just broadly the slopification of everything,
yeah,
is like how much does that matter? Like if they can get people, my biggest concern these days is people who just get stuck in their phones and like
yeah,
are unable to like leave that space, like are unable to just go out in the world. Because I think, again, like to what we were talking about, there are these the kind of recognition of all these things that are fucked up. But also if they just have our attention captured on stuff that is like really, really stupid so much of the time, it eats up so much of people's time. I mean, obviously they're doing that because they figure out ways to monetize and quantify that and, you know, colonize our brains essentially, right?
yeah, yes,
But it also can just get people stuck in these spaces where you're spending, 12 to 14 hours just, I mean, no offense to us as streamers, I think we're better than most, but like the people who are sitting playing video games for 14 hours and are not talking about anything, right? Like there's some folks that are just in that. And it's amazing to me, for instance, with young people, the I don't really understand it, right? Because on one end, their attention span can seem so short that they just watch TikTok reels, which is like 30 to 90-second things on like repeat. But on the other end, they can somehow sit for 12 hours and watch a streamer go through an entire season of like Fortnite or something like that. And it's like, I
Hyper
don't
focused.
know. Yeah, it's like, how do you have enough attention for that? Like, so,
Yep.
but both of them, either one of those scenarios, like, tech and the state and everybody's gonna be perfectly happy because they are absorbed for that full day.
Yes.
And, they're not doing anything essentially.
Yes. I mean, there's an aesthetization that's involved in it, right? There's a book that I read ages ago called Sober Living for the Revolution that was basically like Fugazi and all these folks, these sort of punk bands wrote, that actually took that approach to the way that the United States particularly mobilized drug and alcohol use in college, which was in a very delicate time where people could otherwise be engaged and organized and meeting comrades or in the streets, and they weren't saying that that's the only developmental stage, which is, I think, where psychology comes in and goes, here's where it's developmentally appropriate for you to be an idealist, and you do all this shit in college, and then you get a job and you grow up and you're no longer a leftist. And if you still are, then somehow you're immature, or we know the drill of how that's how psychology works with the state to do that. But there's something that you're talking about anesthetization, that's the parallel that I made, is like, that is the same sort of process. And there's something that's, I have to say, as somebody who's not from the United States and living in the imperial core, there is something particularly pernicious about being here that starts to feel like a warp. Like it's really warps the way that you function, the way that you think. And that's why the constant antagonism is really important, because apart from the fact that there's like this vortex of like, this is the center of the universe and this is what you have to be focused on and all the shit that's happening here. And in some ways that's true because it's an empire and it exports all the shit everywhere and tries to swallow everything up. That's why it's a vortex, like a fucking black hole like that. But on the other hand, I think particularly this year, it felt so urgent to leave and to go back home and to be like, there's something so real about being there. And it might be like proximity to the shit that like we're always talking about. It's definitely part of that. But it's also disconnecting and really dislodging oneself from even the flow of life in empire. Like when there still is a different flow, and I'm not saying even like Europe is not part of this, but there is a different flow even in fucking Europe about like places being closed in August because people take a month-long vacation, or you have to plan when you get your bread and milk because people take 3 or 4 hour long breaks during the day to sleep and see their families. And like there's a particular flow that plays into anesthetization that you're talking about. And these poles of it, you're either like hyper fixed on some, but it does the same thing. The function is the same, whether it's a 30-second TikTok video or a 12-hour binge of a streamer doing something, with Fortnite. The impact and the function is the same. You're dissociated and dislodged from like reality. And there's something about living in the United States that is both this like hyper reality and also just the only reality that you can be in. So there was something about being there and even the hardships. And I'm not trying to romanticize people not having electricity, but there's something about being connected to how most of the world lives because the United States lives like it does. About being able to be like, oh, most of the world lives like this because it's underdeveloped in this way. You were saying like most people know where their suffering comes from and who's responsible for that. That there's something so humbling and then reconnecting. And there's another thing about Lebanon in particular. Palestine feels like this in some ways when we were there, but Lebanon, there's like, I was saying this when I was doing the live stream with Adnan on Friday, is that particularly in organizing and political organizing, there's relatively few degrees of separation between people and your impact and what people are experiencing, and like political impact too, versus the United States that feels so big and like so disparate. And maybe that's part of like the dissociation and all that, like on all levels. And then there are these massive channels that are created in an entire infrastructure to support that. So there's all these things that I started to, like, I don't know that I thought about them all together in that way, but you talking about it and like that becomes the symptom. What you're seeing is like the TikTok thing, or is the symptom that can help us look at all this and like, why does it affectively feel different to be outside of the United States, you know?
Yeah, it's been too long for me since I have been outside of the United States, but I have experienced that. And I have, I lived in Ireland for 6 months, and when I came back here, it was like just awful. That's the most depressing period of my entire life. Was coming back to the United States after living in Ireland for 6 months. And Ireland was depressing in its own way because it rained every fucking
Yes, a
day for
different
like
type.
5 months. And but like and there was a lot of drinking involved. But the yeah, it's just so different. I mean, and just like the level of commercialization of
Yes.
everything, commodification of everything, like the way that everything that you do. I mean, even we struggle with this as parents. I think every parent probably struggles with this of like,
Yeah.
what do you do with your kids anymore to like not spend money?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you want to do something, like go out and it's like, how do you do that and not spend money? And it's like everything, even the things that used to be like relatively manageable, um even stuff like camping or whatever has become so like there's just so many levels of all of these things that get commodified and turned, and that's just what capitalism does. It's really good at it. It's really good at figuring out like how do we take everything that people like to do and make them have to pay to do
Yes.
it.
And then feel
I mean,
guilty if they're not and can't.
yeah, and it's actually funny to me because in some respect, I was thinking about in Portland, Oregon, the Lloyd Center closed recently, like which who cares? It's a massive mall, but like it's just a very interesting thing that we're in this phase now for those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s where like the thing to do was to get with our friends and like go to the mall, and just walk around and like you could cheaply play the arcade or whatever you could do. Like there's things you could do that wouldn't cost a whole lot of money, but mostly just to be in the space together. And it's amazing to me that like the internal contradictions of capitalism are such right now where they can't even maintain that, like and this is how starved that people are for public spaces, like even though that's
Yeah.
not really is never really a public space. Like anybody who ever tried to like do a protest in a mall knows that like the whole thing is private property and that they utilize all of that. But just like spaces that can be accessed where you can go into it without having to pay to get into your way in the door. First of all, I don't actually camp. I should clarify this, but I would like to, and my family adamantly does not camp. And the thing about it is why it's a reference point is growing up in Southern Oregon, like that was one of the things that people would just do.
Yeah.
And my parents famously subjected me to this. So, like, for example, one summer when I wanted to be playing Little League Baseball, I was forced to spend 9 weeks in a 19-foot RV in Alaska. And so, we camped RV camping, but we were in this. Imagine being stuck in a like 18, 19-foot vehicle slash container with your parents for 9 weeks when you are 9 years old.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
It's a lot. But did get to see grizzly bears, orcas, all kinds of cool stuff. So I actually have fond memories of it at this point, but I did not when I was 9.
Yes.
Um,
It builds a different type of patience and resilience to be subjected to that. I have like the opposite thing, because when when my folks moved us to Canada in the early 90s, and I will always be grateful for my parents, who were the only immigrants in the world who said 7 years and meant 7 years and then moved us back home. I'm so grateful to them for doing that. But like in rural Canada and in Alberta, that was like the camping was like what people did. So I have like a visceral response to like against camping for that reason.
It's a very like settler colonial like fantasy activity, it is. Yeah,
Yep.
it's like, oh, let's imagine we're pioneers for a day,
Yes, yes, exactly. And what's interesting is just like, and the freedom of movement for those people, right? Like we can sort of pack up and our home goes anywhere because this entire land is ours. And that was made very clear, because they were so fucking anti-Indigenous, of course, that it was made clear that like all of this is ours to traverse, and we can sort of set up camp anywhere. Which then, of course, contrast that with what camps mean when you talk about Palestine, or when you talk about refugees in general. Like, that's the thing of like, this is a whole different fucking understanding and register of what we're talking about. Like, right? Like setting up camp and then you have a home to go back to, versus setting up camp and never going home.
No, but there is like this connection too of kind of what you were talking about, which again is like I also don't want to fetishize like not having electricity and things like this, but like there is very much you take technology away from things, and you take away like some of like it's actually, I find it to be profoundly freeing at a certain point of like parts of your brain that you don't even you know utilize that often, or just enjoyment that you can find in like genuine enjoyment that you could find in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. And I think
Yeah.
that um there you know I mean, to the question of that whole balance, like I actually really appreciate, for instance, Max Isles' work in the People's Green New Deal, because this is one of the problems with like both a lot of imperial core um like degrowth
Hmm.
thinking, as well as like just different aspects of the climate movement have been, if you think about degrowth, right? um basically the argument is like we need less development, less, utilization of electricity, less CO2, like we need to kind of deindustrialize or decarbonize some of these processes and so on and so forth. And ultimately it will mean like less growth. And that's actually largely true for the imperial core, like we do need that. But in other parts of the world, they still need aspects of development. They still have been on a completely other end of the spectrum in terms of like how much electricity and energy that they've been allowed to use
Yeah.
for purposes that are like good and positive for the development of their societies, and building roads and whatever, like all kinds of things that are necessary, right? Or maybe not necessary, but can improve the quality of people's lives in certain ways. Um, and so there are people who think about those things, and I think it's important to kind of have that lens, because and it's also the difficulty that I do think is difficult in dealing with imperial core organizing and activism sometimes, is that it still falls in sometimes with this idea of we need more. like us as the workers who have been
Yes.
exploited in the imperial, like we've been denied. And yeah, like to a certain extent, like so, like yeah, we should have healthcare. Like there are like basic things that we definitely should have. But when you get in that logic of just like more, and you've been so acculturated into these capitalist logics of accumulation and consumerism and so on, then the more very often can just be like, more money to spend on
Yes.
just, again, slop and junk and yeah.
Random shit, I gotta say, and it's also humbling and like checking in. Like, you and I in the past, and when we first started doing our, checking in on the psychic space stuff, we talked a lot about, the things that lodge themselves inside of us even when we don't realize it. And those are the moments to pay attention to some of how this shit gets in us, and what are some of the things that are continuously working inside of us undetected, which feels really important. Maybe that might be our segue to the mythology stuff. But to this point is, it was hard to be without devices. And I was in the mountains in my beautiful, you know, I come from a hamlet, and it's gorgeous, and it's pine trees, and like I was at my folks' house. Like everything I would need is there, and I was truly happy being with family and, on the land. And there's a particular smell that just lives there, right? The brush, the trees, the cicadas that are specific to that space, that are, can sound deafening to people who aren't used to that space, but are amazing. And I found my really checking in about like, it's hard. Our whole lives are connected to that. And part of that is, whether it's friends or comrades or work, and like me being like, I was on a planned break, and I'm still thinking about, fuck, there's going to be like 1,000 emails after. That's the sort of shit. And like, that's a part of our everyday life. But to think about the ways in which that has become a part of our everyday lives, where it feels like a part of you is not with you. There's something really disturbing about that, actually, about that being the impact of it, irrespective of like, yes, there are other things that were there, that I was very aware of the fact that I did not have like a phone to reach to, or any one of these things. And like that is important for us to tap into, like you're saying, of like, what are the purposes of these things? What is it distracting us from? What does it detract from? There are some things that we obviously do, and organizing, which is what's being attacked, of course, right now. That's one of the other things that happened while I was gone, is this like, new version. I've heard Dr. CBS talk about this new version of the Red Scare, of course. But it was important to be like, oh, there's this thing that's actually, and that's real, that lives inside of me now, because we live in a world where that is what we rely on, right? I will say, I mentioned this before, I was able to meet George Abdallah while I was there, and that man doesn't carry a phone. He does not and he has no interest in it. He has no interest in having a phone. He's, in demand a lot. And he makes it work, and he shows up for comrades, and he's connected. He knows everything that's going on, but refuses to have a fucking phone. So I'm just like, there's something here, which, again, not romanticizing, obviously, being a political prisoner, but like that, again, your relationship to the world has to change, and you find ways of being that don't include these other forms that feel like our lifeline or our way of functioning in the world. And I was just like, this is a good idea. Don't do it. Like, don't come in.
Oh, that's great. So one question.
Yeah.
Did it get easier a little bit over time not having a phone? Like, did you get like did you get a little bit used to? I'm sure you still had like at least every day like a pang of like, oh, like I can't look at this. But like, did it? I imagine in the beginning it was like every hour you were like reaching for something that
I
wasn't
felt like I
there,
lost
and
my phone. Yeah. I was like, oh
yeah,
shit, where did I leave it? You know? Yeah.
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 So I mean, for one thing, I mean, for like George Abdullah, like imagine coming out of like 5 decades of incarceration and seeing all of these people that you're around, and they're all like, and you're like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, what are you doing right now, man?
Yeah.
Like, there are human beings out here. What's happening?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, yeah, obviously you cannot romanticize the imprisonment aspect, but I do think about that. I mean, I've talked to people who have come home from long-term incarceration, and it is always a difficulty that they have, even if they had like some access to technology or were part of some kind of program. Like sometimes prisons will have computer programs just because they, whatever. I mean, it's usually through like the whole like weird, you have to have a job in order to be a real human being, and reality is you do need a job to pay for your apartment or whatever, and so those things. But um you know I've talked to many about that challenge, especially like elders, like people that were in for a long time and like they had no exposure to it really when they were growing up. Cell phones in a big way, but even computers, right? Because you think about it, like computers weren't really a thing until the 90s. Like before that it was a fairly niche thing that a lot
Yeah.
of people just didn't even have one. So yeah, that's big. um so you know who else doesn't have a phone though?
Pan Africa.
Well, that's a question. Yeah, I mean,
She didn't the last time I saw her. Who
maybe
doesn't
not.
have a phone?
So somebody brings her a phone. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
She has a landline. She has a landline.
she's a landline. Okay, okay. Um, well, Christopher Nolan doesn't have a phone,
Interesting.
which I'm not like. People are gonna cancel me. No, I'm not sitting, but I do. And the funny thing about it too, though, is like like he was asked somewhere like why like how does he get away with that, and he's like, well, everybody around me has one. And so it's like,
Uh-huh.
well, that's stupid. That doesn't actually count. Like you have fucking like, you have servants that are looking on their cell phones for
Exactly.
you. Like
That's what's happening. Come on. You have your every part of your life is curated for you. You don't need a phone, actually.
no.
That's
But
funny.
yeah, so I mean, my question to you, right? So we did do this thing on the Odyssey. I did actually like force like Gemma and M2 both, when I brought it up to them, were both like, oh, I'm interested, but that means I have to see it, and I don't want to see it. So I did actually like really impose that upon them. And Renee's laughing because I've also made Renee watch things before that she didn't want to watch. Um, but
I think that's the whole premise of Imperial 80s. No, you made me also watch shit we didn't want to watch. It's a thing.
uh,
It's okay. It's okay.
yeah, yeah, it is kind of the thing. It's I am the person in. No, I don't even want to
No.
reference Clockwork Orange, but like, yeah. But as I was thinking through all the perspectives that we had, and Gemma and M2 are brilliant folks and had a
Yeah.
lot of great stuff to say, and shout out to both of those comrades. But
Yes.
I was like, we're missing the decolonial psychology perspective here. I still do not understand why white Americans think that we are Greeks, like that we like that literally like Greek mythology is like these are our people.
Mhm.
Like this is a very fucking strange phenomenon. Like it's one thing to sort of self-indigenize yourself into the United States, which is also very weird and upsetting and bad. But like then to think about some people that are like 9,000 miles away from you, and talk about a period of time that's 3,000 years ago, that is also a group of people which I'm sure are quite distinct from even the people that are in Greece today, right? Like just because of how freaking long and like migration flows and all this stuff. That to be, I mean, one to have crash outs, right? About like Lupita Nyong'o playing
Yes.
Helen of Troy, which like if you read the Odyssey, they do actually refer to Africans in the Odyssey, and they do say things like well, it's different translation, so I don't know what the actual ancient Greek is here, but like the sunburnt peoples and Ethiopians, like these are things that show up within the Odyssey, and they don't name Helen as that. So I do understand like right-wing weirdo that, you know, but I also don't care, right? Like this is not something that bothers me of like who plays these people. I don't know if anybody's been to theater in the last 40 years, but usually they are pretty, liberal with like who plays what roles and it not being, defined in these like strict racial terms. But more to the point is why does Matt Damon make sense to you as Odysseus?
Yes.
Right? Like why does Tom Holland make sense to you? Like we're talking about British and English and US, settlers, and that isn't raise anything. But one of the things that you see with all of the discourse online about this is just very, very deep investments that people in the United States have towards Greek mythology. And I know it's not just Greek mythology, it's also like, I mean, there's the fascination with the Norse mythology, which is always just like,
Yes.
you are
That's some
absolutely a
Nazi
fascist.
shit.
Like,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
I promise you.
You're 100%.
I guarantee
There's no
you,
other way around it.
like, no offense to people who are like Norwegian or whatever. I'm not talking about you, but like, the Graham Plattners of the world, right? The people who are getting the tattoos from the Norse gods and stuff like that. And, it's like, yeah, that's a fascist. And then, but also like Roman mythology and all of it. I mean, there is a huge, thing with this, but I just was surprised that still in 2026, that people were so invested in it as these are our stories. Like this is, and I'm like, what are we talking about? So anyways, I've talked enough.
I mean, you know me, I love that shit. I love those confessions. So I'm just like, this is the chance for us to like track this shit in real time, right? Because there's something so fundamentally telling and a confessional about where the limits of imagination end, right? That you have a problem with a Black woman playing Helen of Troy also confesses something larger about your imagination of who populates the world. And so there's something actually really important about the workings and the infrastructure of racism as a structure and white supremacy as a structure that comes out in these ways. I think this is why we should pay attention. This is why I'm grateful to you for forcing me to watch this, because I think Dylan has always said this, is that we need to actually learn how to read these things there's a reason why this movie in particular breaks the trend that you were talking about in this particular moment, right? And the inclusion of trans people and Black people and all that. And I heard the conversation, which I thought was brilliant. Folks, if you haven't watched it, definitely watch the conversation that Jay's talking about with Mtume and Gemma. Was like, yes, it's an afterthought. Of course it's an afterthought, because it always is, because you are fundamentally still lesser than. But there is a really important way in which even these sort of, like, this is a DEI on movie screen, not just in terms of who we select, but what the actual function of DEI is you expand it enough where then white supremacy becomes the project of everybody. Because that trans person or that Black person is not just asked to show up, they're asked to take in and swallow the entire narrative to be able to join in the civilizational discourse and the spoils of white supremacy and civilizational discourse, right? You don't get to do it half-ass. You have to actually join. You and I talked about this when we were having the Kamala discussion. It's like all of the sort of mobilization of Blackness and womanhood, but really, what are you asked first to join in? It's America. You're an American because you are joining Kamala. The Blackness and the womanhood are the entry point. But once you're in, once you join in, once that Black character is there, once the trans character is there, that's not what it's about, because that all fucking fades. There's no functionality to it. What is there is you are actually joining in the infrastructure of white supremacy. And there's a price to pay for that. There's a wager you're making when you do that. You want to join, and you might still be second in line and shit, but you might get the spoils of this in a particular way. This is, for me, what's part of it. Now, what's interesting is what you said is that even in the European discourse, I mean, we might all know this, it's like Greece is diminished and denigrated in the European.
They
right?
hate the Greeks in Europe.
100%.
They're like, there's a constant, like, kind of desire to push them back into Asia, right?
Exactly.
Like,
exactly. So it's like, so that's interesting too, because it doesn't actually have to do anything with reality or temporality, even though that is the argument they make. This doesn't make sense because, temporality speaking, in this time, there would be no Black person, there would be no trans person. I'm just like, that now you care about, like, concretely things mapping onto shit, but you are able to collapse centuries and just be like, this is the direct lineage that we're talking about. So there's something about that particular fantasy in this moment. I don't think we can actually divorce that. In a moment where you and I were just talking about, when empire is collapsing, when white folks specifically feel like things are being taken from them, like there's a collapse of their greatness. And even if they're not Trump supporters, I'm sorry, you still actually play into that Make America Great Again, which is why all these, like, stupid No Kings March and all that shit still have American flags in them, because that's what your libidinal investments are in restoring the flag and what the flag fucking stands for, and your ability to have, a nice empire, right? That we still do all this shit, and it's not about dismantling any of that. So the mobilization of this particular movie in this moment is central. If it happened before, and the inclusiveness of all these other people. But that can't happen, by the way, without the infrastructure that already exists to mobilize the civilizational discourse, which at the end, I know the last part where you have, what's her actual name?
Oh,
Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway. Yeah,
Anne Hathaway. That you give her those, and it might have been like I don't know, like a anti-Trump thing of like, we'll get back, but for me, I'm hearing it also in current, like, it said something about Dawn, and I'm like, the fascist party in Greece right now has that name. So I'm sitting there fucking listening, being like, this is a fucking dog whistle for fascist white supremacy through and through. And I know you all spoke about that, but it was such a fascinating way that, like, what it invites and how it gets in, and how it's a practice of normativity of these things. And that's why I think there's such a connection to that. And there's a glitch when you see a Black person, because your identifications are with this in wholesale. It's not a half-ass identity. I don't give a fuck if you're a liberal or not. When you feel like this is encroaching on the narrative of your legacy, that's the piece. What's the legacy of whiteness? And that greatness is something that somehow temporally collapses, and we're still there. That's the psychic. It's psychotic in that way. There's like a collapse entirely, and we are still that. we still have connection to that, which if you're talking about a parallel of the Zionist entity and the narratives white supremacist Zionists tell of their connection to that land thousands of years, where there's no disconnect between that timing, it's the same fucking shit. It's the same logic, right? It carries so much power.
It's so wild. Like first of all, that's great. I appreciate all those comments. I mean, the whole discussion around DEI and, I mean, we need to reach out to Dylan because his book is done. It's not out yet,
yes,
but
it's out in February. Yeah, but it's
we
done.
need to see if he's ready to have some conversations on it. But yeah, I mean, he does talk a lot about civilizational discourse and civilizational projects within his work. And you're right. I mean, the what's funny about it, I guess, is exactly that you have both Matt Damon and Tom Holland, and then you have Elliot Page, who plays, who's the trans man, and you have Travis Scott, and you have Lupita Nyong'o and other folks, right? And I mean, my reaction to some extent is like that you should find it as weird that Matt Damon can play Odysseus as Lupita can play Helen, right? But of course, like, you in thinking about what is Nolan's project there, right? It's like his project is that the diversification is important in terms of building the investment in the civilizational discourse of different groups of people, right? And so serving the connection to someone like Kamala Harris. There's also like I do think, and the greatness point, I think, is important too. I mean, this whole fascination with heroes, right? Which we obviously have, today, the most prominent examples of it are the Marvel, the Marvel world, and just all of these different, movies. And those are, in many ways, in today's Hollywood, where everything's kind of, who owns the intellectual property, and then we just keep spinning out like movie after movie after movie with the same intellectual property. Those have become really the American heroes in these like mythological fictional terms, right? Is what I'm talking about here, folks. Don't get it twisted. Of the 21st century, right? Like it has been that stuff. And I just kind of had lost in my mind that people still cared about Greek mythology in that way, but they do. But also, it's so weird. Like, you have all these people who have never read the Odyssey, which is another whole thing. I mean, and like,
because does it really matter? I mean,
no. And I took a Greek mythology class in college, and I fucking hated it. I slept through it most of the time. My professor was boring as shit. Like, but I read that stuff, right? I did. I was forced to read those kinds of those books. And I mean, like, as a kid, it's like they are like comic books in many ways, But it's so weird. I don't know. The whole thing is weird to me. I don't have anything else to add.
I mean, they're taught in courses that are called great books. That's what I mean about the infrastructure that builds it all up. So even if it goes into dormancy and it's dormant, and like, you haven't heard anybody talk about Greek mythology for a fucking long time.
Oh man, the classicists are the worst right now. Like, they're like, well,
they're melting.
Actually, this went this way. It's like, nobody fucking cares about your book.
It's not the point. Exactly. But there's an entire emphasis, like at the American University of Beirut, there was a sequence called civilizational sequence. And that's where the Odyssey is read. And that's where Freud is read. That's where Marx is read, by the way. But that tells you something about, like, that is the most honest description when you're talking about what are the things that form our life structurally. And even if you don't hear anybody in your vicinity talking about Greek mythology, how does it live within us as an example of greatness? And men, by the way, it's also a masculinist, patriarchal idea of things. And how, you and I have talked about this before, about the heroes thing is important, but Senora is never the hero. Because when they were showing that, this for the first time, I thought about that. Like, we all know the Trojan horse and all this sort of shit. And I'm like, for the first time I was watching this, and I was like, oh, you motherfuckers have a problem with people in tunnels popping out of nowhere to surprise their freaking oppressors. And when they're like, now you have and that's the inability to see is because the identifications with who remains the hero is actually more important than who the hero is or what the fucking hero does. And that's the only, because they can't handle anybody else being the hero in their mind. Male, in their mind, European, which you're right, like ancient Greeks, like what the fuck are you even talking about? But the grafting of that's what I mean about like the collapsing of temporal. It doesn't matter, because the identifications are with who remains the hero always. And there is a transient nature to this that like might change shape and time, but in the end, the logic remains the same. Because if you remember, they were having the same sort of fucking meltdowns around the Little Mermaid, and I'm just like, you care about a black woman in the Little Mermaid? Isn't the issue of like the mermaid? Like it's a mermaid. that's one of the things you might be looking at, like, this is unreasonable or unrealistic. I'm like, it's the mermaid that seems to be the issue here, not the fact that she's black. But those are the sorts of things. That's what I mean about, they feel delicious to me, because they tell us something very important about the structure that we live in, and that our whole life is infiltrated by, that can hide in plain sight. And knowing that those are the workings of it helps us, I think, adamantly resist it. But also, again, like, what are the limitations? The limitations of imagination here are not by chance. They're because fundamentally how the imagination and the psyche is constructed is very much about stabilizing a world order in which that hero remains the same. And you can't see, you have to miss a tune away from, because I can watch that and be like, Hezbollah, Hamas, Yemen, Iran, but those motherfuckers aren't seeing that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's always like kind of Samantha Yousaf's point, I think. And it's an interesting thing to get into, because I think that, I mean, there's a certain way in which I have often had fun with comrades, where we look at a movie that's about whatever and say, well, like, what if it, like, what if we read it this way? Right. And, but, her point is always like that we know how it's going to be read by most people. You know what I mean? And I think that's like, that's an important thing, is that whenever we get into these kind of like fun, we can subversively read this, or like, Star Wars is about third world revolution or whatever, like people want to do. It's like, okay, but like, that's not the set of psychological processes that go on with most people. Even if George Lucas says that XYZ is like the Viet Cong, like that's not going to translate into what happens when people look at Luke Skywalker and like, so slow down, everybody.
Yeah, because what's the world saturated by? Is not to look at and see that's the Viet Cong or anybody else. Like, that's not the world, the dominant world I'm talking about, the normative world order that is stabilized politically, economically, relationally. That is what coloniality is. That's what we're talking about. It's a world saturated by coloniality. And so, your instinct is not to be like, I see Hamas in tunnels when I see the, Trojan horse. No, there's an entire world that's what I mean about how you're also taught about Greek mythology and mythology in general in schooling, in the way that you're there. That is there's a function to that that's not just about remaining true to history, which is what a lot of people also say. It's like, no, there's a cultural and political significance here. And that's the thing. I'm just like, this is the moment. And how much money it made tells us everything we need to know.
Yep. All right.
What else is on our list? What else happened while I was gone?
I mean, do you want to get into like the Red Scare thing, the new Red Scare, the Cuba stuff?
Yeah.
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 I mean, there's multiple things going on right now. You know, we've had Prairie Land. We have this use now of like this government basically using terror charges to like exempt. I mean, and like, I don't want to say this too as though there's no precedence for this too, because there was also been examples of like anarchist prisoners historically. And this, I know, is a little bit of a different thing, but they've gotten terrorism enhancements on sentences in the past, like people from like the Green Scare and people from, I think Eric King did on his sentence when he was in. So it's not totally unusual or totally outside, but there is this new executive order, and typically, I guess what it is the global war on terror laws have typically not applied to people within the United States, or like especially citizens, right? But so there's that element of different levels of state repression that's going on, and obviously this is coming on the heels of all the stuff around Palestine, Mahmoud Khalil, and other folks that were, you know, scooped up in the, you know, ICE and the use of that for non-citizens and going after certain students. There's a whole thing. You probably are more familiar with this even than I. I think we talked about it maybe in passing when we met, but like there's this huge crackdown. Stephen might be familiar with it. The huge crackdown on just foreign students in general in the United States. So it's like this acceleration of the collapse of universities, because in case anybody didn't know, those are the students that are actually paying tuition in the United States right now. So there's that going on. And then you get this, there's also, I'll put it separate for a minute, but it's related, is there's these prosecutions that are going on. One with Roy Singham, who has funded a lot through like Code Pink and People's Forums and Breakthrough News and, you know, other organizations, PSL affiliated organizations in particular. And then there's Fergie Chambers, right, who's currently being held in Spain. We actually did talk about that a little bit today with Iker, which was interesting to get his perspective in Spain of like, you know, what's the political calculus there. So, you know, also somebody who's funded certain like Samir Project, Palestine related organizations and other organizations on the left in the United States. But that's all going on. And then you have this Cuba report, which like is an interesting report. Again, I mentioned it does read very sloppy, but it's also in certain ways, like I was talking to Arlene Eisen about it. I hope she would be okay with me sharing this, but I would assume so. But that she's like, a lot of it is accurate, right? Like her perspective is it's important to understand that a lot of the things, like you wouldn't necessarily frame it right in the same way that the State Department does, and it's not in terms of trying to criminalize, but the idea that of Cuba's centrality to the rise of the new left in the 60s, she said, is like, it was obvious and we all understood it, and Cuba was hugely important to all of us. The Cuban Revolution was massive to us and our politicization, right? And, you know, it gets into the Tricontinental Conference, right? Cuba's role of supporting liberation movements around the world, obviously Southern Africa, all of the things that Cuba did there to support the fight against apartheid and, you know, these settler controlled states in the south of Africa and so on. And it all, of course, goes through, you know, because because Marco Rubio brain is just like communism is everything that's evil, and so this is a plot to like, undermine freedom and everything else. And then it turns inward, right? And then it gets into all of the organizations and it goes to like all the brigades, all the groups of solidarity work that happen within the United States. And then it starts to go to organizations like PSL. It also goes to DSA, which I think is important. DSA also is at this weird point right now because they're being targeted both by the right, because the right is mainly going after the Democratic Party for having them in their ranks, and because some of their candidates are winning now, right? But then it's also being the Democratic Party is going after because they're like, these people they're winning, right? And we don't actually want them to have control over our agenda either. So all of that is going on. And I mean, one of the things that's been on my mind is sort of like, well, how much of this is internal purposes and how much should we read it as like they're really going to go after all of these organizations in the United States? And they will, I'm sure, but like what will that actually look like, to me is an open question. Or should we be more reading it, right, as just this is a lot of legwork that their AI has put into figuring out how do we create the pretext for an invasion or an attack on Cuba that people seem to have been waiting for a while, because it feels like it will happen at some point? Or is it just both, right? Like, it's like this is convenient for us to like sweep up everything and to go after all of this stuff. And it's a little bit of a thing, I think, for the left to think about. One of, what does solidarity over sectarianism mean in this moment right now? Like, how important is it for us to show up for each other, even if we have significant political differences on certain things? And two, yeah, like also recognizing that these organizations are seen as enough of a threat, i- that the state is actually targeting them and demonizing them publicly in different ways. And even if it's not taking the form of like, assassination squads or something like that, at least yet, it is taking the form of lawfare and of, a lot of public pillorying and all of this kind of stuff. So those are things that are broadly on my mind, and also in terms of not just like the threats, but like, what are the possibilities for the left right now to actually kind of approach this through a positive posture rather than just a strictly defensive one.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the big piece of it, is like we're not backing away from, how the state wields its power and how it's violent. It's violent how it does that. And it has everything at its disposal to do this. But I think there's something really important about what Arlene said, is there's something about these sorts of reports and the spectacle that's important. And this is why it's fascist. It's not just fascist because you're politically trying to eliminate anything that destabilizes you. That is part of it. But it's fascistic also because it has to be done through spectacle. And it has to be done through spectacle that then mobilizes affect states that do something for the state in places it can't reach immediately, right? Outside of like assassinations and shit like that. Did you want to say something?
One quick thing is I forgot to mention Calla Walsh in this also, right? Calla Walsh has also been, has Randy Fine writing a letter of we should have like a FBI investigation for terrorism, support for terrorism and stuff like that. So I did want to name that because shout out to Calla.
Yes,
as well, so.
Shout out to Scott. I got to spend some time with her in Beirut, so it was very nice to actually finally meet in person. But that's exactly the point, right? This idea of using people as examples has been something that's been done for forever. But that's the particular thing here. When I heard about this Cuba report, apart from Marco Rubio, I just imagine how he's just a loser that's getting his revenge on everything, and like, and he is anti-communist to the core. So now he's in a position of power. When he can make this happen at a policy level, make his daddy proud of him, right? And like, that's part of it. Like, that, if we're talking psychology here, I'm sorry, this dude is doing that, right? And taking out that on this particular moment. But there's something here about coercing us affectively and psychologically from backing away. That's what's laundering shit. That's what blackmailing, emotionally blackmailing us to say, no, Cuba is not the centerpiece, because it then gets linked with criminalization. And we're trying to fight the criminalization, saying this is some fascistic shit, we shouldn't be doing that. But what that does is displace and misguide us about what our argumentation should be. Cuba is that. That's why it's been strangled for this long. That's why precisely it remains a target, and not just in its past, but because, I'm sorry, COVID's not done yet, but in the height of COVID, Cuba was sending doctors everywhere. There still are doctors in rural Italy where no one else will go, which, by the way, Marco Rubio personally sent somebody to coerce the Italian government to fire the Cuban doctors and have their entire fucking healthcare system collapse because Cuban doctors could no longer be there. So there is an accuracy to that. And I think there's some way in which we pretzel ourselves and like bend away from it, because we're being blackmailed into doing that. And for me, this is the part about disidentification that we've talked about, is that because there's something fascistic, a fascistic process happening, there's a way in which we can be seduced into thinking, if we do this correctly, if we say the right things, if we engage the right way, if we show publicly, you and I have talked about that at PSL, like putting out statements, we condemn this shit. None of that shit's going to work under fascism. But there is still an invitation and a seduction into that. So I like that Arlene's like, why are we backing away from that? This is the moment actually to say, absolutely, Cuba has been the center of this. Here are the reasons why. How do we move forward from this? What are the ways we have to rethink this? Not disavowing the power and the violence and the ferocity of the state. And like you were saying, this is not new. Of course, more recently, Stop Cop City and Atlanta, like there were charges that were added onto that for like a Venmo, situation that happened, like a moving around of funds or whatever the case is to understand that as part of a long-term political project, which the global war on, quote unquote, on terror was fundamental to inscribing as policy, that then of course gets turned inward. But like, I think that's the piece that if we're thinking about as leftists of what do we need to do in this moment, is to be aware of these invitations to bend away and then make the argument like we might as well be fucking liberals. This is the liberal argumentation of things, because you think that's going to fucking save your ass. But if we can sort of look at it as the condition under which this is happening is fascism. That is the centerpiece. It's not, Cuba is ensnared in that because it's a representation of something else, particularly in the face of empire and this, the wet dream of an anti-communist. But to really continuously come back to the condition as being fascism, I think actually might open up different possibilities rather than get wrapped up in the trap they set for us. Because all of these versions of disidentifying fundamentally also creates a target on somebody else. And I just can't fuck with that shit. Like that, why are you creating a target? Your safety under conditions of fascism are necessarily built on the targeting, incarceration, and expulsion from social life of particular people. There's no way around it. And I think that's I feel like that's the conversation we should be having. How do we not get seduced into that position?
Amen. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that in some ways that I think that this kind of repression across like various different lines, right? Not because what happens, and this is what you're talking about, right? But what happens with the prairie land thing is that then the tankies, for lack of a better term, right, go like, well, I'm not an anarchist. I don't blow up fireworks outside of a detention center. So this doesn't really, like, yeah, it's concerning, right? But I'm not going to do too much solidarity organizing and that, unfortunately, like, it's a really shitty, it's not doing politics. Like, it's something that and it's been a struggle of mine for a particular while, I think, because when we started out, the millennials, like, initially we were like, well, we want revolutionary anti-capitalist perspectives. And my politics have shifted quite a bit since we first started. But as we were originally defining that and thinking about our line of demarcation, it was largely actually the revolutionary part was most important, right? So the idea was like that the social democrats were actually the line to some extent what we were trying to draw, that we're saying this is outside. Like,
Yep.
I'm not actually concerned with somebody who wants to just be elected and do some reformist
Yep.
measures and like do that. That's fine. There's plenty of people talking about that and doing that kind of politics, right?
Yes.
um and so for us, we were like, well, we primarily, and this was probably, I was more interested in some, not more interested on the whole, but more interested as a percentage of what I wanted to talk to than Josh was, of talking to some anarchists. But they were always a part of that. And I've always found that, you know, gosh, I have a great episode coming out with Mohammed, who wrote the book on Sudan, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he has this line in it that I'm going to say here, which is just, we were talking about the Sudanese revolution, and he was talking about it. And we were talking about, because I felt like in his book, he's somewhat critical of some of the structures and like the fact that the neighborhood committees like didn't just like translate into a party. He talks about their
Yep.
decision not to allow parties in and kind of the horizontal nature and all of this, right? I promise I'm going to be able to come back around to this point. But the thing is that what he said was that he spends quite a bit of time talking about the revolution itself and what they did
Yes.
in our conversation. It was just beautiful, like him talking about all the things that were going on, and like, and very like logistically of like, we were setting up barricades over here, and like the amount of like logic that was like the things that people were figuring out together in the streets and stuff like that. And I've like kind of talked about some of the discourses and some people who are from parties, right? And this is something I've experienced within the United States context, and I bet other people that are listening to will have experienced this as well in some form, who like may come out to this stuff at certain phases and may participate in like marches or things like this, right? But when it gets really a little bit like, okay, people are building barricades, like they're like trying to carve out some, like there's a break that many of them happen of like, this shit is getting too dangerous, or like whatever.
To
Maybe
black
they think
bloc.
it's maybe they think it's stupid, maybe they think it's black bloc, maybe they think like
Yeah.
whatever. Like, and I'm not saying that there aren't like some legitimate concerns that people can
Yeah.
have about these sorts of things, right? And decisions that people can make that I'm fine with
Yes.
too. What I'm saying is what Muhammad said in the context, it'll make more sense when people hear that interview, but he's like, the people who sit on their computers and talk about like, oh, this isn't revolutionary enough, or da 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 da, as like this. He's like, these people are weird, man. It's like they're just antisocial. Like, you kidding? Like, this is like, we're like fighting the government, like, and everybody's behind this. And your thing is to like post online about, this isn't that, and it's not this, and it's not. He's like, this is a very strange behavior. This isn't antisocial behavior. And I just loved it because I was like, yeah, like that's the thing, is it's like you participate in these
Mm.
moments, right? And yes, like nothing is guaranteed out of them. Yes, there
No.
is going to be repression that comes from them. Yes, like yes, there are limitations to what you're going to be able to achieve, but
Mhm.
also it's exhilarating, and the possibilities of that moment are amazing, and they transform people. Like they and people,
Yes.
the amount of political education and understanding that people can go through in moments like that is like it's there are force multipliers to what is going on inside of your brain and in your being
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. And he really lays that out well. So I say that to say that a lot of times those people who are doing this and who are down for that shit, and this, they are anarchists,
Mhm.
right? But then when they face repression, it is very often the case that everybody just walks away and
Yes.
kind of turns their back on it,
Yes.
right? And says, "Oh, they were going crazy. Went too far," and da 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 da. Da. And I'm just saying, like, what does
I'm
it
not for
mean?
destruction of property.
Yeah. What does it mean if we never if we just
Yes.
don't draw that line in that way,
Yes.
right? And we
Yes.
say, like, we're going to like, even if we're in a party formation, sure, we may have discipline and limits of what we're going to participate in openly in a party, but we
Yeah.
will help participate in the legal defense of people who do other shit, because like the the
Yeah.
the people participating in this is a part of like how this
Yeah.
thing actually grows and sustains and
Yes.
develops into something more
Yes. And at
meaningful and
least not
powerful.
isolate and put a target on, make it easier for the state, which you allegedly also are against. That's my thing. Is like we can't get around this idea that by doing that, by backing away, I don't give a fuck what you think about anarchists and all that and their position on things. It's like fundamentally you're creating an easier target for state repression and the state, and you're radically redistributing who always holds responsibility for that in a very specific way, right? Whereas like we know that's actually not how it works. I, you and I have always, I think, seen eye to eye on this. We've agreed around this. I hate the sectarian bullshit. And I think white anarchists have a way of also engaging in that, which is what my like that's why I'm just like that type of fucking I don't fuck with that shit either, because they're just like we're not about national liberation movements are fundamentally oppressive and Palestine shit. And I'm like, go fuck yourself. Like this is not what we're talking about here. But this is one of the things that I was talking about with Adnan on our live stream on Friday, is that there is something back to the idea of something uniquely global north or US about this uh short-sightedness or around coalitional aspects or struggle, and that somehow if you organize and are coalition with people, that you immediately means that you are identified with their strategies and their shit for everything is in lockstep. It's like that's not what this means. And also back to the warpness of it is like this debate is not new between strategies and theories and what is right and when do you demonstrate and when do you fucking engage in like this is an old debate. But what are the moments upon us and what does that demand of us? So the other thing I was talking to Adnan about, and so forgive me folks if some of you heard this on Friday, but like when we were in Lebanon, we went to Kozo Akamoto's funeral, and this is the degrees of separation, and there were PFLP flags everywhere, of course, and there was the most adorable little Palestinian kids from the camps with PFLP, flags, and they were walking in the procession, and George Abdullah and all the militants of that time were there, who are not Hezbollah, by the way, but who have always understood what it means to, when at the time comes, what it means to fight state repression in particular ways, that your enemy is the same enemy. And one of the most moving things about it was when they were burying him in a cemetery that was just for martyrs for the Palestinian cause. But for the folks who might not know, Kozo Okamoto was part of the Japanese Red Army. So he's not even, quote unquote, like, I hesitate to say this, but I want to say this for the point I'm making. He's not even Lebanese, but was dedicated to the Palestinian cause, lived in Lebanon his whole life. He was the first person who was granted asylum in Lebanon, was kept in Palestinian camps and protected because the United States particularly were looking for him and passing along information to Japan, to just like they did with Fusako, right? But one of the most moving things that I heard, that while they were giving like eulogies and sort of speaking, and his comrades were speaking, they said that when he got sick, that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah specifically basically tasked his medical team with taking care of him. This is a PFLP militant. And Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah himself personally was interested enough in his safety and his care and his health care to make sure that that happened. And that's, for me, when I see examples like this, I'm like, what the fuck are you all fighting about? Like, it's the same shit that we're seeing, whether it's Qassam brigades and PFLP or DFLP or Hezbollah and Qassam brigades. Like, first of all, you have to know fucking history. Second of all, it's just like, what are we actually fighting? And yes, we can think about divide and conquer, but this is actually where, yes, there's always divide and conquer at play, but it's about identifications rather than what are we trying to disidentify. This is where we should be disidentifying from empire and all the ways that it works, and sectarianism being a very easy channel for this shit to work in particular, because it taps into fault lines that have been structured for reasons. Like, there are reasons why this is a never-ending debate, but like now more than ever, I just, if nothing else, if you want to take that position, I'm not going to let you have the innocence that somehow you're not creating an easy target, especially if you are an avowed anti-imperialist and, you know, understand how state repression works.
For sure. For sure. No, thank you. Did we have any? I'm trying to think of what else did we.
Yes. How are you doing on time? I know our time, the time for this live stream is a little bit, but how are you doing on time? If you have something else that's pressing that you want to talk about. I have a hard stop in like a 15 minutes or so, but.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I wonder if does the chat have anything?
Yeah, do you have any questions for us folks? I want to ask you a question, actually, because I've not been,
Go ahead.
This was something that and as people, if they have questions, what is this thing about a third? Okay, so first of all, this made sense when I heard it, because it makes sense why Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Candace Owens have been up fucking Palestine's ass, which I've always said, these people are not our friends, folks. You and I have talked about that too. Is it true that they're vying for a third party in the United States? Like, this is what I'm hearing, and I'm just like, this would make so much sense that these motherfuckers have like built the infrastructure, because what they will get is the fucking racists who hate Trump. But of course, my concern is also the misguided Arabs and pro-Palestine people. Like, they've spent all this time garnering attention and capturing this part of the population, which of course this makes I'm like, oh, this was we knew you were charlatans all along, and this was opportunistic, if nothing else. But what of that?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't know. Like, thinking about politics within the United States is such a painful thing. Like, especially like when you talk about party politics, electoral party politics, because there is a certain level of which third parties historically are really quite irrelevant, right? Like, we just have not been able to develop a third party that in the electoral sphere that's capable on any kind of consistent basis of winning elections, whether it's right, left, like whatever. I mean, like, you gotta go back to like the Whigs and the fucking progressives and like this weird, late, prior centuries, really. And I don't know. I haven't delved into this. My assumption was always that like their long game has been to set up Vance as like Trump got a little too, you know, maybe they had the Epstein files on him. He's a little too cucked to Zionism. Like, I know I'm talking about Cena right now, right? Like, I sound like Cena, but like this is kind of like what I think that their kind of move is like, how do we, if we know that the MAGA coalition has been somewhat fractured by this capitulance to Zionism, or like that's the way it's perceived. Like you and I think would read this a little bit differently of like the relationship between, the US and the Zionist entity through imperialism and all of this kind of stuff. But like in their discourse, right, in the Republican discourse, it is strictly just in those terms of, coming out of even like the far right, Turner Diaries and all that kind of stuff of like Zionist occupied, government and this sort of this idea, right? That shout out to Cena. What's up, man?
You're
But
always here.
he's always yeah, great to see you. So the in the Tucker sphere and the Candace sphere and all of these spaces, I mean, what do they have? Like they have media enterprises that seek to build constituencies that then they seek to actualize into political power. Like, and that goes way, way back. This is kind of just right-wing radio since like 1980, is that they have all these people and they build up they kind of test out all these issues and talk about them and see what resonates, and then they funnel these things into certain politics. Historically it's been the Republican Party. My belief is it still would be the Republican Party. I mean, because I think that more likely they may try some kind of like, oh, let's create a new party, etc. But I really would be shocked if when push comes to shove, the move doesn't become, well, Vance is actually, because he starts to move in certain ways where he starts to talk about the Epstein files. Like, I don't know if you've seen some of this stuff, but like he has a way of like sort of worming in there of like, yeah, it's true. Like, it's clear that Jeffrey Epstein worked with both the CIA and Mossad, right? And that he had shit on a whole bunch of people. Like, so like I think they kind
They're
of set
gonna
him
fold
up
it back in.
of
Yeah.
like, maybe this is the move to try to get, maybe they're worried about Trump trying to run for a third term. I don't know what will happen with that. I mean, I appreciate Callie Akuno a year and a half ago or whenever that was, like before the last election, basically like saying, hey, people, you should prepare as if there's never going to be another presidential election in this country.
Yeah.
Like you should prepare as though that is not going to happen. And how would you organize your communities to like defend themselves and be able to exercise some form of power, some form of mutual aid, some form of subsistence farming or whatever, right? In the case that you're going to be under siege by
But to
fascists
function like
for
that, you
yeah,
have to disidentify from
yeah,
jingoism and American exceptionalism. This could never happen here. And it's just like, I love that. It's like, yeah, I could. And here are the reasons why.
But I don't know. I mean, the short answer is I don't know. I mean, I guess they could try it. I don't think it would be successful if they did that. Like, I think it would actually harm the right, because I think it would pull enough. It would pull just enough. Like, it's like the Libertarian Party. It's like they already kind of have these things of like these right parties that pull, some votes away. But I understand the point you're making, because the point for them, the logic they would go from is like, how do we use this vehicle
Yes.
to go after people who would vote for the Democrats rather
That's
than
it.
people who would go for the
Correct.
Republicans,
Correct.
and pull away some people who we think have a base, like certain social conservative values and so on and so forth, but are anti-war and all that.
Genocide, anti-genocide. Like that's the P. They saw that being pro-genocide is what tanked the Democrats. And I don't hold it against them. And so, like, what connects Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens, and fucking Tucker Carlson is like all of them have now become champions of Palestine. And I'm going to say, go fuck yourselves. We don't need you. We don't need you for a free Palestine. It's going to be free with or without you. But it's interesting to me. It's opportunistic because they're opportunistic fucking grifters, you know, and they have money and they have reach and they have a whole following. So, yeah, but I see what you're saying.
It's clearly a set of psyops and a counterinsurgency operation.
Yes.
I just haven't quite figured out like what is the angle that they're working with. And I think that there is a whole issue, which is just that people really do not like Israel at this point. In case you haven't noticed, is that like it's very except in a few places and a few localities. Like there are a lot of areas of the country where, saying some silly stuff about, to support for Israel or whatever, like it just like even conservatives look at you like, what's wrong with you? Like, what are you talking about? I mean, and I say that like, again, growing up in Southern Oregon and having been back there, like I was actually shocked that there was way more like anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian graffiti going on in a very conservative part of the country than there is in, the liberal suburb that I live in. Way, 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 way more. Right. And so I was like, like it's actually, it's the middle, right? It's a weird set of people that are still hanging on to Zionism. Fucking John Fetterman. Like, it's just,
I mean, they're left with true fascists and white supremacists. That's the only people who with a straight face, and that there's an overlap, of course, with like Christian Zionism on this, because that's what they are, right? But under the guise of like their religiosity. But I agree with you, and maybe this is like sort of, we can start to wind down here, is that I had the same experience in Lebanon. And I've said this before about us actually saying these things and coming back to it over and over again is so important of reality testing, because we understand, and this is going to happen more and more as we get closer to these fucking elections that have a global impact, and the stuff with Cuba and everything happening, is that there's a way about algorithmic sort of rigging about who we hear and the narratives we are meant to listen to, where you would think that there is actually more support for the Zionist entity. And that for me was like the centerpiece of me going back home, was to like put my ear to the ground and sort of talk to people and, government workers and cab drivers and even family who are like, don't have good politics. Everybody hates the Zionists. Everybody hates the United States. Everybody understands. And even when they are not pro-resistance, people are like, Iran's standing up for us. Iran's the only fucking place in the world that has like stood up to these massive assholes. And like, it's funny to walk them because they're like in a bind. They're like these people who have like, don't like Iran and have all this other stupid propaganda that comes with it, which don't even get me started about some of the conversations I had to have. But fundamentally are just like, oh, we hate the fucking Zionists. We see with it. And like, that's the world we live in. And I think this goes back to the conversation about don't let this shit bend us away from reality, where we're like throwing Cuba under the bus or these things because we think it's like, no, the global fucking majority knows what's up. And that's where we need to continuously be aligned, even when the realities make it look like there's like everything's against us. It's actually the exact opposite. The exact opposite. And if graffiti, by the way, is one way for us that like everywhere in the world has free Gaza, fuck Zionists. I was in, you see it everywhere. You see it everywhere. JD Vance is a pedo. I mean, this shit, it's like, why is this here? But it's because people get it,
Yeah. I saw something the other day that like Israel wants to lower the age of consent to like 13 or something like that. I mean, it's like like it's so impossible. I don't understand how like anybody that defends it, it just looks like so ridiculous. I mean, I don't know if people saw this, and like, so Jon Stewart is like a very low bar of, like, we're not talking about some, like, he's a liberal Zionist, right? Like, let's just say, like, that's what he is. He's liberal. He has had his criticisms of Israel historically, right? Like, I think he's probably one of those people who probably, doesn't like the fact that Judaism is always associated with Israel and that kind of stuff. But like, he's not calling for, like, he's been supported a lot of like very milquetoast liberal stuff and people and so. But his interview with John Fetterman was hilarious for those moments. Even as he said certain things, I'm like, why are you saying this? But like the just because it's like Fetterman looked like such a freak, just sitting there like trying to defend the relationship, and Jon Stewart's like, really? Like, why do we have to give them all these like, what are you like, why?
Yep. And sometimes it's really as simple as just like, let them do the talking. They will. It's like that fucking settler with that BBC video where he's just like, yeah, 1 million Jewish lives, a million Palestinian lives is worth 1 Jewish life. And the BBC reporter's like, that sounds racist. He's like, yeah, I know, but we're the chosen people. It's like, let them do the fucking work and believe them. Stop holding on to the fucking legacy and myths that they shove down your throat. Believe them. Take the reality of the supremacy that they're putting in front of you, and then you organize against that. Don't like search to rehabilitate because you're worried that somehow that's going to make you an anti-Semite. No, they're fucking telling you they're the ones who are supremacists, right? So it's just like, we're in a different era. We're in a different time. Just fucking embrace the good parts of it, because everything else is a horror show. But anyway, my friend, I knew we would get into a lot of shit. I so appreciate you. Is there anything else you want to end on or say anything?
No. This was great. It's always good to be in conversation. It was good to be back on the platform, and this was good. Appreciate it. And I look forward to I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you Sina said make racism great again.
Thank you, Sina. Yes, I'm glad I'm back too. And back in the swing of things. Friday I have Alana Lenton on to talk about her awesome book. So watch out for that announcement, folks. And Jay's got a lot going on as usual. So make sure you subscribe to both of our channels. Make sure you subscribe to East is a Podcast. Sina's here. Spread your love, spread the likes, send it to people, and make sure we don't get suppressed by the YouTube overlords.
Shout out to Alana Lenton. Yeah, that should be really good. I look forward to checking that out.
Very excited. Very, very excited about it. Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. All right.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.